one of the things I think about as the right thing, I know you grew up in a working class family and I grew up in a single parent household mired in poverty, is having stability in our financial system. One of the places where we need the greatest amount of stability is for our banks. So think about Silicon Valley Bank and other banks that failed recently. As you can imagine, as the chairman of the banking committee, I care deeply about the stability and strength of our banking system. From your vantage point, can you provide your assessment of the current safety and soundness of the U.S. banking industry, and what steps you believe are necessary to ensure long-term stability?
Senator Scott, good to see you. Good to have two South Carolinians in the room. And look, I think the strength of the U.S. Economy, our financial markets, is the depth and breadth of our financial systems. I believe that we have likely seen the top 5 banks become too big a share of banking assets. We have seen, because of undue regulation, the shadow banking system get larger and larger, and to the detriment of community banks, small banks, and the small regional banks. So I think that we have to take a look at both regulatory and supervisory conditions in those. I think that the banking system is well capitalized, perhaps over-capitalized, and this comes from someone, my background is as a financial institutions analyst. I've also taught the history of financial crises, so I am very attuned to the idea that financial stability is important. The pendulum tends to swing from one way, go into overshoot, and that from 99 to 2008, that was an overshoot. And since then, the regulation, our banking system has been constrained. And if we are going to have the kind of the generalized Main Street prosperity that I would like to see over the next few years, it's going to be driven by communities, small banks, and small regionals.
Well, if I had more time, maybe another 5 or 6 minutes would be great. I don't think I'm getting it. Thank you very much. We'd spend a little more time on Basel III because your answer actually reinforces the fact that Basel III puts more capital on the sidelines, which means there's less capital to loan for mortgages or for starting small businesses. But I won't go there. But where I will go, however, is towards opportunity zones. As you know, I wrote the legislation, and opportunity zones was in fact a bipartisan piece of legislation, although it's only supported by Republicans. And the results of the opportunity zones has been astounding. My friends who are mayors, Democrat mayors, support it and celebrate it. My friends who are Republican governors support it and celebrate it, because the fact is simple, that $84 billion committed and invested in opportunity zones have led to real help coming into some distressed communities. It's only had less than a 5% gentrification rate, which is really important. But for the housing question, so many folks, mayors around the country, said for the first time, because of opportunity zones, they're seeing affordable housing in their downtown areas, and they haven't seen it, John Geddes in Rock Hill, 3 decades. So we know that they've been effective without gentrification. I hope that the administration will spend some time encouraging and supporting the next iteration of opportunity zones. Your thoughts quickly?
Senator Scott, I think they have been a resounding success. And I recently read data that in terms of affordable housing, the opportunity zones have created more affordable housing within the zones than any other federal government program since opportunity zones were created. So I think that it's a fantastic way to address the housing crisis. I think the inner city redevelopment. I think we could think about opportunity zones more in rural areas.
Yes.
So I look forward to expanding and continuing the discussion.
Thank you. My last thoughts will be a comment, not a question. But as a result of the TCJA, we saw the richest Americans' tax burden as a percent of revenues coming in go up. And we saw the poorest Americans as a percent of revenue coming into the government go down. I think the easiest way to say that is to recognize that a single mother like the one who raised me in 2017 made on average $40,000 a year, her tax burden, her tax percent went down, her tax rate went down by 71%. That is a result of good policy being good politics, and I hope we keep our eye on the ball of helping the average American have more of their money in their pockets. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Besson. Thank you for the meeting we had in my office. I understand that.
Next is Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, good to see you again. Thank you for being here before the committee. Yeah. One of the beauties of our country is we have foundational documents that point us in the right direction. I think it's the compass that shows us due north, true north. The Declaration of Independence mentions life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as unalienable rights. You and I had a serious conversation about the importance of life, and I'm a pro-life Christian, as you know. And you said that you assured me that your deputies were going to be pro-life. Is that still the case?
I will implement President Trump's policies. I serve at his pleasure, but I share President Trump's view that every abortion is a tragedy.
Now, my question was, are you having deputies within your at HHS that will be pro-life?
As I said, I can tell you exactly what I'm going to do, so there's no mistake. I'm going to implement President Trump's policies. President Trump has told me he wants to end late-term abortion.
Are you hiring people who are pro-life at HHS?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. During the first Trump administration, HHS began investing in policies to support individuals living with sickle cell anemia. This has continued. A career staff person has dedicated time to coordinate sickle cell disease-related activities across HHS and other government agencies. Will you commit to continuing to have an individual serve in this coordinating role for sickle cell?
Yes, and I think I've worked on sickle cell for many, many years. I told you I have many friends who have sickle cell. Several of them, I've seen the suffering that they endure. 1 out of every 365 blacks in our country has sickle cell. There are now promising gene therapies. They're very, very expensive. But it's something that NIH should be enthusiastically supporting that kind of research.
Well, you answered my second question, so that's great, which was today you noticed the FDA gene therapies are really breakthrough evolutions in science that are really one-time cures. So you support the continuation of the research that makes that more available?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. That's great news. This past fall, due to one facility making the majority of our IV drugs in the U.S., it was devastated by Hurricane Helene. Hospitals and healthcare facilities across the country faced IV shortages. Nephron Pharmaceuticals in Columbia, South Carolina, tried to shore up IV support in South Carolina hospitals by creating the Palmetto line in its facility to help make IVs for hospitals across the state. We must do more proactively to address the shortages and the shortage risks, as well as to provide and promote the production of medical products here in the U.S. If confirmed, how will you prioritize efforts to prevent and reduce drug shortages, including for essential medicines?
Including?
Essential medicines.
President Trump has told me it's his priority to bring essential medicine manufacturing back to this country. It's a national security threat. So much of it has been exported abroad, and particularly to China. And it's a priority for him, so it's a priority for me as well.
Very good. Will you commit to fostering productive public-private partnerships that can provide the government with key information on pharmaceutical supply chains, help direct shortages, and improve the long-term security and resiliency of the U.S. drug supply?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you very much. And one of the things that we study, I had 2 opportunities to question you. Once yesterday at the Finance Committee, I opted, as opposed to seeing you twice, just see you one time and spend my time doing some other things with that time. But I think it's important for us to recognize that we are in a critical place as a nation. We're so dependent on other countries for the essentials, from healthcare and beyond. And we ought to work on a strategy of resilience across this nation in all of the essential areas that we need to become less dependent on the rest of the world and more dependent on ourselves. And I hope that as your term at the HHS, you will spend a lot of time thinking through and all the layers and complexity that is under HHS, how we become more and more resilient as a nation.
That's absolutely critical for our national security and for our economy. And President Trump is doing that through HHS, but also, more importantly, through the Commerce Department, and meeting directly with pharmaceutical industry leaders to figure out what kind of incentives that they need to bring manufacturing home.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my 8 seconds.
I come to the floor today because I am concerned about President Trump's actions to, I believe, start a trade war with our top two trading partners, Canada and Mexico. All goods coming from Canada and Mexico, as of midnight last night, I guess midnight today, face a 25% tax. That is all except Canadian energy, which is taxed at 10%. Trump's tariffs will make everything from gas to heating to groceries to lumber and more expensive for everyday Americans. And I think it bears repeating that tariffs are paid by consumers. They're paid by Americans, not by other countries. And what the president is doing amounts to a new tax for Americans. For example, heating oil and propane that keeps hundreds of thousands of Granite Staters warm in the winter is going to cost more. We're going to add about $150 to $250 to the cost of heating homes in New Hampshire. And gas prices are going to go up. In New Hampshire, half of the fuel in our cars and trucks comes from Canada, and U.S. refineries across the Midwest use Canadian oil. The U.S. imports 80% of its potash fertilizer from Canada, and this tariff makes farming and food more expensive. It's unclear how the American auto industry is going to continue to operate. Ford's CEO said these tariffs will, and I quote, blow a hole in the U.S. industry that we have never seen, with up to $12,000 added to the cost of a car. And this will make lumber and electrical equipment that we need to build housing at a time when housing is already in short supply. It will make them more expensive and harder to find. Those are just a few examples. There are countless other imports that American businesses and families rely on that are going to be hit hard. And these tariffs do nothing to bring down those costs. They do just the opposite. These tariffs could add $1,200 to an average household's yearly costs. And we won't have to wait very long for the impact to be felt. It's already being felt on Wall Street and the stock market. Target's CEO said this morning that the consumer, and I quote, will likely see price increases over the next couple of days. And for small businesses, these tariff taxes will be felt by small businesses in all of our states. I was here a month ago today sharing stories from business owners in New Hampshire who weren't sure how they were going to keep operating if specialized machinery that they can only get from Canada suddenly costs 25% more. And since that time, I've heard from even more people in New Hampshire, more small businesses. Last week, I heard from a small company in Windham, New Hampshire. It makes allergen-free cookies, and they can only get certain ingredients for those cookies from Canada. The CEO built her business, which now employs 30 people, and now she can't be sure if they're even going to be able to keep going, let alone keep growing. When I spoke with business representatives across New Hampshire last month, the theme they kept coming back to was uncertainty. As a former small business owner, I know that uncertainty is the most destabilizing aspect of running and growing a business. Yet, that's what this administration keeps creating. Yesterday, we learned that new orders from manufacturers dropped in February for the first time in 22 years. For the first time in 22 years, new orders from manufacturers dropped because companies can't work with this level of uncertainty. Last Wednesday, the president was talking about Canadian tariffs going into effect April 2nd. The very next morning, he announced 25% tariffs would go into effect today. The whiplash is hard to imagine. I spoke last month about a bus company, C&J Bus Lines in New Hampshire, that was worried about these tariffs and what it would mean for their bottom line. Well, the CEO moved up his delivery date to get 3 buses in late March before these taxes were set to go into effect. But his cost just went up more than $450,000. Businesses plan months, quarters, or years in advance. They need to place orders and plot out their growth in order to succeed. How can they plan when they can't even know whether their costs are going to go up 25% overnight? How can a developer know if they can start building the housing that New Hampshire desperately needs if their lumber could cost 25% more overnight? And how can a family already struggling with high costs continue to pay the rent or put food on the table if their household costs are going to go up $1,200 this year? I want families and businesses to know that the whims of this president are not going to cause them to break the bank on everyday items they need to get by. That's why I introduced the Protecting Americans from Tax Hikes on Imported Goods Act. It's a simple change, really. It says that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, can no longer be used to place taxes on imports. If the president needs to block some dangerous product, he still can. But if there's a real threat, we'd want to stop it, not just add a tariff tax. That's what my bill does. It would stop these tariffs on goods and energy coming from Canada and Mexico, and it would give businesses and families more certainty to plan for the future and to keep their hard-earned dollars in their pockets. So, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S-151 and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, that the bill be considered read a 3rd time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The senator from South Carolina.
Thank you, Madam President. Reserving the right to object. IEPA is a powerful tool that provides the President with a range of authorities to protect our national security. With all the challenges facing our nation, now is not the time to be limiting presidential power. And that's exactly what Senator Shaheen's bill would do. Instead, we must use every tool available to combat these threats. And we are already seeing results. As an example, Colombia accept migrant return flights. We have seen Mexico and Canada take initial credible steps to combat fentanyl and illegal immigration. Now is not the time to tie the hands of President Trump. Thank you, and I look forward to working with my colleagues in the Senate through regular order to ensure that we take every step to protect our national security. I object.
Objection is heard.
I know that my colleague from Oregon wants to speak to this issue, but I just want to respond in a couple of ways, and I know my colleague from South Carolina cares about the issues that I'm going to address. But he mentioned fentanyl, and that's what the president has used to justify the tariffs. He says this is a way to stop the flow of fentanyl into our country. But he's forgotten a few inconvenient facts. First, it is that in 2024, CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, seized about 43 pounds of fentanyl along our northern border, about 1% of the fentanyl coming into this country. Now, it's long been known that fentanyl is not coming from Canada and that hard drugs and firearms flow north from the U.S. into Canada. In fact, on February 25th, the Canada Border Services Agency announced the seizure of 410 pounds of methamphetamine and 42 pounds of cocaine from 2 commercial trucks seeking entry into Canada at the Coutts Port of Entry. Seizures like this are not uncommon, and wouldn't it make more sense if we agreed to work together with our Canadian allies instead of putting a tariff on it? The second fact that bears mentioning is that the vast majority of the fentanyl crossing the southwest border is transported by Americans hidden in their cars and trucks. That's why I've supported, like most of my colleagues in this body, have supported more funding for technology and personnel to better find these drugs before they enter the U.S. It's why I supported the border bill last year that this president stopped because he wanted a political issue. And on China, We can debate another time whether this is actually the right long-term strategy with China. But more important than that, my bill does not prevent tariffs against countries like China that have unfair trade practices. Both President Trump in his first term and President Biden have already placed tariffs on numerous imports from China to respond to its unfair trade practices, exactly what Section 301 of the Trade Act is for. That tool remains available. My bill only addresses the ability of the president to tax imports on a whim. And I want to note, thanks to this president, we now have higher taxes on imports from Canada than from China. I don't know how that makes sense, that we are taxing our allies more than we're taxing our adversaries. So I would say, is this really about China? Or is a more important motivation here to raise costs on American families to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy? And as the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, I take very seriously our ability to use sanctions or other tools in foreign policy. This bill does nothing to limit the use of sanctions under IEEPA, nor does it prevent an embargo or fully blocking dangerous imports. But I don't think a tax is the right solution for those issues. In fact, this is breaking the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement that President Trump negotiated just 6 years ago. And if we're going to break the very deal we've negotiated, one of the, I think, most important achievements of the first Trump administration, why would people want to work with us in the future? Why would they want to work with a Trump administration? How does being an unreliable partner to our closest allies help our national security? And I think it's important to be clear on this. Donald Trump's trade war doesn't create any manufacturing jobs tomorrow in the U.S. In fact, it's far more likely to cost us tens or hundreds of thousands of jobs. Half of the goods that America imports are intermediate components, and that means that they're parts that our companies manufacture into finished goods. Every one of those items coming from Canada or Mexico just got 25% more expensive. And we've already heard from automakers, they're not sure how much this is going to add to the bottom line of cars. I think that's a lot at risk for tariffs that President Trump can't justify for any other reason other than because he wants to get funding to support a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans. And yet the president is talking about wanting to cut deals with Russia for economic development. I don't see the logic in going halfway around the world to deal with a dictator, a murderous dictator, by the way, like Vladimir Putin, at the same time we're damaging relationships and cutting off trade with our closest allies right here in North America. I'm happy to listen to somebody's explanation here, but I don't think it makes sense, and it seems entirely contrary to American values to me. So I hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will see the folly in what the president is doing, will recognize the impact on the economy and American families because of these increased costs, and agree that these tariffs should be rolled back. Thank you, Madam President. I yield.
The committee will come to order. I want to thank my colleagues on this committee and our witnesses and everyone for joining us today for this important discussion about the state of affordable housing in America. Housing is a deeply personal issue, frankly, to all of us, I think, and frankly, to me as well. My brother and I grew up in poverty. I've said that several times. My mother did everything possible to keep a roof over our head and, frankly, to steer us towards a better life. I learned early on that housing is not just about having that roof over your head. It's really about the opportunity to build a better future. Owning a home has long been the pillar of the American dream. But for too many Americans today, working families today, that dream has slipped further and further out of reach. We must confront the reality that during the Biden administration, housing affordability reached record lows. Mortgage rates have grown by over 150% under President Biden, from just under 2.67% on average in January 2021 to 7% by 2024. Meanwhile, rents have surged by nearly 25% in that same time, putting more pressure on those unable to buy homes and forcing many into unstable living situations. Perhaps the most devastating statistic of all is that homelessness has hit a record high, an 18% increase, 18% increase in just 12 months, and a 30% increase since COVID ended. This raises an important question. Why do we continue to confront roadblocks despite massive government investment and support? The hard truth is government interference is perhaps more of the problem than the government resources are the solution. Spending trillions of dollars on the housing market is not the answer. Today, we will hear from leaders and experts about what needs to be done. We are honored to have with us today Eric Johnson, the mayor of Dallas, Texas. Go Cowboys. A local official who understands the challenges of housing at the community level. We have Lee Jelinek with us, the Chief Information Officer of United Wholesale Mortgage, who can speak to the impact of federal housing policies, and also Edward Glazer, a respected academic from Harvard University who brings a much-needed perspective on the economics of housing, and Renee Willis, the interim president and CEO of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. The good news is we have a diverse group of experts who can speak to the issue that impacts all Americans in a way that I believe will improve our ability as a committee to get things done, frankly, not even in a bipartisan fashion, in a nonpartisan fashion. This is about American people finding their path to the American dream, and not about Republicans or Democrats scoring points or making points. Frankly, let's make a difference together. I look forward to your insights in discussing real, workable solutions to what most Americans consider a crisis. We need to take a different approach that embraces efficiency, deregulation, and getting the federal government out of the way. There are too many regulations at the federal, state, and local levels, in my opinion, having worked at all three levels of government, to actually building homes in the local communities, whether it's restrictive zoning laws, bureaucratic red tape, or misguided policies that drive up the cost of construction. Policymakers at all levels of government must take a hard look at what's really preventing the housing supply from keeping up with housing demand. That's why my legislation, the Road to Housing Act, seeks to make targeted reforms that will actually work. This legislation would reduce regulatory barriers, streamline the development process, and ensure that taxpayer dollars are used most effectively. I've seen firsthand from local communities that they are best positioned to address their housing challenges. The federal government should not dictate a one-size-fits-all housing program. Instead, we must empower states and local governments to adopt policies encouraging responsible development and increasing housing supply. Let's be clear. Housing should not be a partisan issue. I can't say that enough, because it's just about people realizing their version of the American dream, plain and simple. That's why I urge my Democratic colleagues to work with me and all of our members on the right in our approach to the Road to Housing Act. By working together, we can reverse decades of failed housing policies and bring about real change for tens of millions of Americans who need it the most. I look forward to today's discussion and working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to advance policies that will restore the American dream of home ownership and put more Americans on the path to success while closing the gap on wealth in this country. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and our ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll go ahead and dive into an unprepared 5 minutes of questions myself. Let me first start by saying to Robert Baldwin, who's been a part of our team here for a couple of years, thank you for your service to our country. You have not only served us on the bank committee, you also served us as a part of the national security team as well. Your service to this nation is a blessing to all of us. We don't always know what you do and how you do it, but we are thankful that you did it. And we'll miss you, and I look forward to staying in touch with you and seeing your career continue. I think the ranking member has brought up some interesting points that I want to dive into a little bit and then go beyond that. But before I get there, Mr. Fogel, the Commerce Department plays a central role in helping American businesses compete overseas. What role should ITA and the U.S. Commercial Service play in competing specifically against China?
Sure. Well, that is the number one issue. From an economic and national security issue, that's the China threat. I had the honor of serving in the last Trump administration where that was one of my number one priorities as well on the economic front. So, look, one of the things that we could do better is more interagency coordination, leveraging the capabilities of agencies like the Export-Import Bank, the DFC. There are certain capabilities they have to fight China that aren't being fully leveraged. China, XM, for example, has a financing program of authorization, $27 billion authorized by Congress, and only a couple billion of that has been used. So there's plenty of room there. Also, I'll just note the professional staff of global markets. They're the tip of the spear. They're in country throughout the world, and they're the ones on the ground who would be able to identify the China threat early and allow us to be efficient in competing with China.
Thank you. Just yesterday, we saw the president pause tariffs on 75 countries who came to the table to negotiate with the administration. This is an encouraging sign, and I look forward to seeing how much more the president can accomplish with a fully staffed team around him, including the nominees before us today. Mr. Fogel, I'd like to ask you another question as it relates to the possible negotiations that will produce fruit without any question. More jobs are better.
Yeah. So,
High-paying manufacturing jobs
Yes.
coming to America is probably a really good thing.
It is.
Costs going up is probably a bad thing.
Correct.
So seeing eggs go down by 30% in the last 81 days is probably a good thing.
Correct.
Under the Biden administration, gas prices spiked to records that we are not comfortable with. Bad.
That's bad, yes.
Last 81 days, prices have come down. Good.
That's good.
Okay. Inflation hit 9% in July 2021. Bad.
Correct.
Inflation's down to 2.23% or so. Good.
Good.
Housing prices spiked and interest rates went to 7-point-some-odd% under the Biden administration. During the first Trump administration, we mostly saw mortgages around 3%. I'd rather have a 3% mortgage than not a 7% mortgage.
Right.
You too?
Yes.
Okay. Y'all, we could have everybody participate, but I'm going to just stick with Mr. Fogel since he seems so prepared for this line of questions that I have here. If we were to see a return to inflation, interest rates for homes continue to drop as we have already seen, that's probably good for the first-time home buyer.
Correct, Senator.
I'd like to hope that if we've seen this much progress in 81 days, that the next 81 days, if it's like the first 81 days, most Americans in most places will breathe a sigh of relief. Likely?
Likely, yes.
Yes, sir. Not guaranteed, but I'm pretty sure it's good. Now, there has been some consternation around the tariffs, and I think, frankly, makes sense to me. Question I have is, if in fact we are going to have a resetting of the global economy back towards American dominance, the net effect could be incredibly positive.
Yes, I fully agree.
I've asked my questions too quickly. I have 20 seconds. I'll yield back that time.
Senator from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, today should have been. It should have been a historic day for Americans, a historic day for working class Americans, blue collar Americans to see their financial system democratized. Well, what does that mean, Mr. President? What it means, Mr. President, is a day where single mothers like the one that raised me, the day becomes a little cheaper. Things become a little more affordable. Why, Mr. President? Because we were on the verge of doing something that would have made our markets safer and cheaper for everyday working Americans across this remarkable land. But instead, we witnessed a disappointing display of political gamesmanship that puts partisan politics of a policy and obstruction above innovation. We could have come together as Republicans and Democrats, not in a bipartisan way, but in an American way, to deliver real change for the American people, real change embedded in the passing of the Genius Act. But not this day. I know that this day was supposed to be special. It was supposed to be the day that America as a nation would rise to the occasion of innovation over regulation. It was supposed to be the day where we would come together in a nonpartisan way, Republicans working with Democrats to make this nation work better for that blue-collar comeback. It was supposed to be that day, but not this day. I know what those on the other side would say. Let's be brutally honest about it, though. The Genius Act was a bipartisan achievement at the Banking Committee. It was a bipartisan achievement because we took the time, hours upon hours. You were there, Mr. President. We debated day in and day out for weeks and months before we ever had the hearing. We offered almost 80 amendments during this session at the Banking Committee. We voted on 40 amendments in the Banking Committee. We made the decision to make America's economy safer and cheaper for the American people. But when the lights came on and the cameras were watching, what did we see? We saw those same Democrat colleagues who recognized the urgent need to bring stable coins into the clear, responsible regulatory framework. We watched them take a step back and vote against the very bill they voted for. The bill they shaped. What changed? What changed? What changed, Mr. President? Not the substance. They got more of what they wanted in the last 5 iterations of the legislation. What changed, Mr. President, was politics, not policy, not the legislation, not the substance, politics. Let's be honest. What we saw today wasn't a vote against the legislation. Several iterations. Your staff, my staff, and Democrat staff spent thousands of hours working on improving the bill. Up until 2 a.m. last night, staff getting phone calls from Democrats about what they needed for the bill to pass. It was a vote against President Trump and President Trump's legislative agenda. It was a vote to stop President Trump from having a victory in the digital asset space. It was a vote against common sense. That simple. Trump derangement syndrome has once again hijacked responsible governance in this chamber. But unfortunately, it's the American people. They are the ones who lose. It's blue-collar, red-blooded Americans who pay the ultimate price of inaction in this chamber brought about because of politics, not policy. And it frustrates me. It frustrates me to sit through hours of meetings. It frustrates me to watch people look me in my eyes and tell me we're almost there. I just need one more thing. It frustrates me when my colleagues seem so sincere that they want the revolution of innovation to happen in America. It frustrates me to watch them turn their back on the very people they say they represent. And it frustrates me, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, it frustrates me that the modern financial tools that makes our economy not just faster, but safer. Safer because the blockchain technology makes it safer and more inclusive. Entrepreneurs and developers want clarity so they can build here in the United States of America, not be pushed offshore into a regulatory environment that is confusing. Let me close with this, Mr. President. The bill delivered on exactly what we all want: safety, consumer protections, AML, BSA, all the things that you would want, that I would want, that they would want. We did it. We did it together. But there's something putrid. It's hard to understand how my good friends could walk away from our priorities. But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle decided to chicken out on safety, on inclusion, and on democratization. When the cameras were rolling, the stakes were high. We were left high and dry. Not because of the policy, but because the political landscape dictated, demanded that they deny the average American access on this day. This is exactly the kind of cynical Washington maneuvering that makes people sick to their stomach. But Mr. President, I am proud of the work that we have done. I am frankly proud of the work that my Democrat colleagues on the committee offered to make the bill better. I'm proud of the fact that for a couple of hours in America's capital, we put partisanship to the side. We decided we would just do the right thing. I'm proud that the Republican Party stood up and stood firm on innovation, stood strong on consumer protection, and we were there for national security. I'm not finished fighting, Mr. President. I am frustrated, but we are not defeated. We are simply delayed. We are not finished fighting. We will continue to work on the digital asset revolution that the American people voted for, they deserve. The need hasn't disappeared. Neither has our commitment to American leadership in the digital asset space. To those who chose politics over progress today, the American people are watching.
Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Kennedy, for being here with us today. I oftentimes hear you say the quote, happy to work with you. And I will say that you said it to Senator Kennedy, And as a person who's asked you to work on a number of topics, when you say happy to work with you, you've actually been a man of your word. And I truly appreciate that. We talked about the importance of sickle cell anemia and the research being done, and I invited you down to South Carolina, and you took me up on my offer. You came last month, and I really appreciate you taking the time and investing the energy to talk about an issue that's critical to so many folks, specifically African Americans. And as a guy that is thankful that we are working to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion in the federal government, I do not want some folks to think that all things racial are somehow DEI. And frankly, sickle cell anemia is a classic example of something that has a racial nexus, but it's not diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just a basic fact that African Americans, 99.9% of the time, are the folks that are suffering through sickle cell anemia. And frankly, if you go beyond sickle cell anemia, you find other diseases that have a consistent presence in minority communities. And to that end, I think it's really important that we continue to work together on building on issues impacting minority and other communities. And I would love, Secretary Kennedy, as you move through this reorganization that you are currently going through, I would like for you to answer the question, will you commit that programs involving minority health will continue and not get tied unnecessarily and inappropriately to DEI?
Yeah, absolutely. We will continue. I think that one of the minority health programs has been terminated, and it was one that was deeply embedded with the DEI ideology, but there are 7 others that are going to continue. I want to thank you for inviting me down to South Carolina. That was a wonderful trip. It was really, I got to witness a microcosm, a template for how medicine ought to be working.
Yes.
You have brought together under your leadership hospital systems, pharmaceutical companies and the biotech companies that developed this new technology for treating sickle cell, and patients. And they had all worked together to make it affordable so that South Carolina now has this extraordinary program where if you have sickle cell in South Carolina, you can get 100% funding with, I think it's 100% cure or
Yes.
close to it.
Very close to it. Thank you. I'll just ask the 2 questions as opposed to asking the preliminary to the questions. For all the parents of children with sickle cell, can you please just reassure them that the Administration of Health for America will work on sickle cell and addressing minority health issues? It's a simple yes or no. And will the full budget, and when it's released, reflect funding at AHA for both the Office of Minority Health and Sickle Cell Activities that used to be housed in CDC?
Yeah, well, absolutely. My commitment. In fact, I had a company in this morning meeting with FDA that has a new technology that it seems as effective and may be even more economical. And I'm very, very excited, and I'm excited to show it to you if it proceeds, if it makes it through the traps at FDA.
Excellent.
But yeah, absolutely. I'm going to continue to make that a priority of this agency.
Great. Let me change topics quickly with my minute and 45 seconds left, since I was extended extra 30 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, frankly, as it relates to addressing how our food supply contributes to chronic diseases, including the phasing out of petroleum-based as part of your Make America Healthy movement. I'm really encouraged by the FDA's announcement last week approving 3 new natural color additive petitions. During your confirmation hearing process, I shared your passion for shaking up the food industry, and you are truly doing just what you said you were going to do as it relates to food additives. Because of your bold actions at HHS regarding petroleum-based food additives, the food industry responded by getting rid of these dyes in favor of natural alternatives. Thank you for your work in bringing healthier food options for our kids. Can you talk about how you will use your position to continue to build on your work eliminating artificial food dyes to further improve the quality of food sold to Americans in our quest to make Americans healthier?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big areas of neglect has been linking specific food additives and food processes to the chronic disease epidemic. The NIH has neglected that area of study. It is now the central focus of NIH. It's going to be looking at, and FDA, looking at ultra-processed foods, at sugars, and the 10,000 additives that are in our food that are nobody else's food in the world, and looking at the impact so that we can put accurate labeling on, and when they're really dangerous, we can revoke their authorizations under GRAS.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. President Trump is engaged in massive corruption. There is a government for sale sign flashing its lights on the lawn of the White House. He's selling access and influence through two types of crypto coins. A meme coin, which is a digital baseball card, and he invited the 220 people who gave him the most money for these digital baseball cards, called a meme coin, to come to a dinner where we feed them at his fancy Virginia golf club, held 2 weeks ago. And he said, oh, and the top 25 buyers of my meme coin, those buyers will get some other special access, a special tour. 220 people gave the president $148 million, approximately. And they didn't give him $148 million in order to have a digital baseball card. They gave it because he was conveying that this would give you access and influence. As the president of Freight Technologies, Inc. said, I bought $2 million of these coins. I'm hoping to buy $20 million of these coins because I want the president to change a policy related to freight transportation between Mexico and the United States of America. That CEO was saying out loud what everyone else understood, that the president was selling access and influence. And that's not all. There's another type of Trump coin, crypto coin, that is inducing this corrupt practices. It's called a stable coin. And a company associated with United Arab Emirates said, you know, we're going to buy $2 billion of your coins, and guess what? You get to keep the value of everything earned on that $2 billion deposit. Even at 4%, that's $80 million a year. And what did UAE want? UAE wanted advanced AI chips in order to have an advanced AI center in the Arab Emirates. Well, what did we see transpire? UAE repeatedly advocated for having access to these chips that the United States had previously said were a security risk. Then a company closely associated with UAE buys $2 billion of Trump's USD1 stablecoin. And then President Trump says, oh, you know what? You can have these AI chips. After all, we'll help you establish an advanced AI processing artificial intelligence center in Abu Dhabi, one of the UAE Emirates. That's corruption, laid out as black and white as you could ever see it. This is incredible. This is what we expect of very poor, impoverished countries with dictators running the place, taking a cut of everything. But instead, it's the President of the United States doing it. And our founders said this should never be allowed. Hamilton noted the reason that there is an emoluments clause in the Constitution. He said in Federalist 22, he said, many mortifying examples of the prevalency of foreign corruption in Republican governments. So here were our founders putting together this series of checks and balances, separation of powers between a judiciary, an executive, and a legislative branch. But they knew it could all be corrupted if you had an executive, that is a president, who could be bought. Well, folks, we have a president who is being bought, who is advertising it to the world, and we haven't acted to stop it. Our founders acted. They put a clause into the Constitution that said, no person holding any office of profit or trust under them, that of course included the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, all of us here who are elected, shall, without the consent of Congress, accept any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. Well, MGX, the head of MGX, is the National Security Advisor of the United Arab Emirates. This company is absolutely intertwined with this foreign government. Our Constitution forbids this type of gift to a president or a vice president or any one of us. So here is the fact. We are right now debating a bill dealing with cryptocurrencies. So this is the time to debate and vote on an amendment that bans these corrupt practices. And for that reason, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate resumes consideration of Amendment 2307, post-closure, that the pending Amendment 2310 be set aside so I may offer my Amendment 2349, which would stop the corruption in stable coins for any elected official, federal official of the United States of America.
Mr.
Is there
President?
objection?
Mr. President?
Senator from North Carolina? South Carolina, sorry, brother.
No problem, brother. Reserving the right to object. I think it's pretty rich for the party of Biden to talk about improprieties. I object.
Objections heard.
Mr. President, I hear an objection from my friend and colleague, the head of the Banking Committee. But would my friend and colleague explain why we shouldn't, while we are on a cryptocurrency bill, not consider and debate an amendment to honor the emoluments clause of the U.S. Constitution?
My good friend on the other side of this issue, it is...
Senator from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's pretty clear that the underlying assumption is that there's already something nefarious going on, and I simply object to casting aspersions towards the President of the United States, particularly given the fact that this is the party, not Jeff, but the party that had cocaine in the White House, that had a problem with Hunter Biden's laptop. My point is, I'm not going to cast aspersions on the President of the United States without any clear evidence that any law has been broken, and I do not believe that there has been.
Well, to my colleague.
Senator from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I asked to be recognized. We're in the middle of a series of presentations here.
You recognize you.
You're recognized.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I could understand if my colleague was objecting because that amendment only covers one type of cryptocurrency that is being used in this fashion. And therefore, I'll present a different option, which is to say we should address both the sale of meme coins as a way to profit from people wanting to give us money, and we should also cover the stable coins as well. And so this broader amendment is a more comprehensive way, regardless of what conclusions you might have about President Trump currently, a broader way to ensure as we go forward, this body and the executive branch, the House down the hall, will not be corrupted by us making personal money by selling something like a stable coin or a meme coin, a digital baseball card, a way for people to essentially channel us cash pretending to buy a digital baseball card. So I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate resumes consideration of Amendment 2307, post-cloture, that the pending Amendment 2308 be set aside so I may offer my Amendment 2350, which more broadly covers the set of corrupting risks that we would be addressing, not just for the executive branch, but for the legislative branch as well.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from South Carolina.
I object.
Objections heard.
Mr. President, I'm disappointed. I was very present when the majority leader said on this bill there will be an open amendment process. And we made it very clear that this was one of the issues that we felt we should be debating while we are in a cryptocurrency bill. There are other amendments that should be considered as well. One of them is to stop a form of scam that bypasses a bank teller by getting older folks to think they're wiring money to perhaps a nephew or grandchild in distress, but instead of wiring the funds, they go and get digital coins at an ATM as instructed, but in fact, they're just giving the money to crooks overseas. That amendment should be considered. There are other amendments that address creating more sideboards so that this bill, which purports to regulate an industry, actually regulates it in an effective fashion rather than essentially endorsing an unregulated industry, which is what, in sum, this bill is currently. So I am disappointed. I would, as I asked earlier, for the majority leader to honor his previous commitment to have an open amendment process so that we can pursue the people's work fighting for a better America, including ending corruption in cryptocurrencies. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, ma'am. Chair, banks are facing a record number of regulations. Small community banks are especially burdened by compliance costs. Bank capital requirements should also be appropriately calibrated so banks are not forced to park capital on the sidelines, limiting access to capital for Americans and small businesses. I was pleased to see that the Fed is looking to reform the supplementary leverage ratio. The SLR is supposed to act as a backstop to risk-based capital requirements, but too often the SLR acts as a binding requirement for U.S. banks. Would you agree that adjusting the SLR would free up capital for banks to invest more in treasury markets and other low-risk assets that would be beneficial to families and businesses across the country?
I would agree, yes.
Do you agree with so Vice Chair Supervision Bowman recently acknowledged that regulators tend to review individual elements of the capital framework in isolation without considering whether proposed changes are sensible in the aggregate and contribute to a capital framework in which all components work together effectively? Do you agree with her assessment, and how are you looking at the capital framework holistically to ensure that the Fed is not stifling economic growth?
Well, we're looking at basically the two big pieces now are Basel III and the leverage ratio. And I'm pretty confident we'll move on both of those in the relatively near future. And they fit together, as we discussed. The leverage ratio was always supposed to be a backstop rather than the binding. We want risk-based capital to be the binding capital requirement. So that's how those two pieces work together.
And as you look at I hope, a reintroduction of Basel III, if you're thinking about the bones of Basel III, obviously, over the last several years, we talked about this on Monday, we've heard the comment that the capital requirement was about right, although that capital requirement has been going up every year. And so as you look at Basel III coming back and hopefully being reintroduced and not just recalibrated, what do you forecast?
Well, we very much look forward to working with our colleagues at the OCC and the FDIC on Basel III Endgame, and I would agree we're gonna take a fresh start at that. You know, the last proposal was actually well above Basel minimums. That's the thing. It was the ways in which it was gold-plated, as we say, rather than the Basel requirements, which were very significantly exceeded.
Just giving us an opportunity to go back to the spending at the Fed for the construction, and you said that the items that were listed are not happening. I will say that the National Capital Planning Commission website, ncpc.gov, anyone can take a look at it for themselves, not just looking or listening to the New York Post, not just the Wall Street Journal, but page 129 of the final plans reflected rooftop garden terraces. The page 127 and 129 were where we found the ornate water features and final plans. The new elevators that drop board members off at the VIP dining suite was page 37 of the final plans. The white marble was pages 40, 41, 65 of the final plans. I would welcome your staff coming in to walk my staff through what is happening there, as opposed to what we not have only read in the New York Post, not only in the Wall Street Journal, but also at the National Capital Planning Commission's website. So we would welcome that opportunity to have a.
Can I just quickly say, some of those are just flatly misleading. The
Sure.
idea of elevators, it's the same elevator. It's been there since the building was built. So that's a mischaracterization. And some of those are no longer in the plans. That's earlier. The plans have continued to evolve.
That was one of the questions I asked my staff before having the conversation with you in preparation, and assuming that your response would be to refute some of the things that were happening, was to ask the question, well, since the articles came out in April, have the plans changed since April as a result of the media attention to it, or was that just never in the plan? I would just say that having a clear understanding of what's going to be and when it changed would be helpful for us. I will note that having confidence in what we hear is incredibly important, and I would give you the opportunity to bring your team in or send your team over so that we can have that conversation. That would be helpful.
Look forward to doing that. And if you'll allow me to say one more sentence, none of those things were the cost drivers. The real thing is what were the cost drivers that caused the spending to increase, and we have those too, but those are not the things that did that.
Well, I don't want to.
We look forward to the conversation.
I don't want to eat into Bernie Moreno's time because he's kind of cranky when I do. I would just suggest that when I hear that things are completely and wholly inaccurate, and then I hear that they weren't quite the way they were, those are two very different framings of the conversation. And I only read page 129, 127 through 129, page 37, page 40, 41, page 65, page 129, because I could be wrong without any question, but I don't want to be misled. That's different.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is the financial watchdog to keep people from getting cheated on credit cards and mortgages and Venmo and payday loans and a zillion other transactions. When this financial cop can't do its job, there is no one else in the federal government to pick up the slack. The CFPB has returned over $21 billion to more than 205 million Americans who were cheated by big banks and giant corporations. That is why this agency is popular across the country. But from the beginning, Republicans in Congress have been trying to kill it, and now they want to slash the CFPB's modest funding cap almost in half. Not to save working people money, but to make it easier for corporations to trick and trap millions of people. Scammers love this Republican move. I urge my colleagues to vote yes to support the CFPB, the little agency that fights for all Americans. And I reserve the remainder of my time.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. Section 30001 is purely budgetary and changes the CFPB's funding cap from 12% to 6.5%. It would provide the agency with ample funding to perform its statutory mandate. The funding available to the agency will grow each year as it is adjusted for inflation. There is nothing more budgetary than Congress deciding the funding level of an agency. I ask my colleagues to vote no on this amendment.
Mr. President.
Time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Oh, good. Yeas and nays. Yeas and nays.
Mr. President, look, all this is about
Mr. President.
No, yeas and nays.
I'm sorry, I asked for the yeas and nays.
Mr. President.
Yeah.
I asked.
Senator, point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The pending amendment number 2414 would cause the underlying legislation to exceed the Banking Committee's Section 302A allocation of a new budget authority and outlays. Therefore, I raise a point of order against this measure pursuant to Section 302F of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974.
Mr. President, pursuant to Section 904 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, I move to waive Section 302F of that act for the purposes of the pending amendment. I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Thank you, Senator Lummis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move this amendment, and then I'm going to withdraw it. The reason that I want to just call this to your attention is to plant a seed for further discussion at a later date. The Federal National Mortgage Association would be required pursuant to this amendment to consider digital assets in a mortgage loan risk assessment. Now, what we know is that about 67% of digital assets in this country are owned by people under 35, and they are also the group that only has about 36% of home ownership. So they're most in need of home ownership opportunities, but they need the opportunity to have all of their assets counted in a risk assessment. This would call on our national mortgage entities to consider the value of their recognized digital assets in considering their mortgage suitability. I want to discuss it at a later date. Now is not the time because this bill is in such good shape going forward. I want to compliment you, Mr. Chairman, as well as everyone on both sides of the aisle for your hard work in bringing this bill to the floor. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I withdraw the amendment.
Thank you very much. There are no further amendments. The question is now on ordering the bill, the Road to Housing Act of 2025. I urge all my colleagues to support the bipartisan legislation. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Crapo?
Aye.
Mr. Rounds?
Aye.
Mr. Tillis? Aye. Mr. Kennedy? Aye. Mr. Haggerty?
Haggerty's aye.
Ms. Lummis? Aye. Mrs. Britt?
Aye.
Mr. Ricketts?
Aye.
Mr. Banks? Aye. Mr. Kramer? Aye. Mr. Moreno? Aye. Mr. McCormick? Aye. Ms. Warren?
Aye.
Mr. Reed? Aye. Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Mr. Van Hollen?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Cortez Masto?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Warnock?
Aye.
Mr. Kim?
Aye.
Mr. Gallego? Ms. Blunt Rochester? Aye. Ms. Alsobrooks? Aye. I have 24 ayes, 0 nays.
Can you say that one more time?
That is 24 ayes, 0 nays.
Let us pray. Okay. Will you lead us, Reverend Warnock? No. Hallelujah. Okay. The ayes have it. The Road to Housing Act of 2025 is hereby ordered, reported to the full Senate. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes and that the cordon rule be waived. Any objection? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Thank you, Senator Warnock, for doing so. In closing, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. Some of you traveled across the country to be a participant in this hearing. Really helpful information provided to us today. I think that this committee should act, frankly, on increasing the limits. I think that it's not simply the payroll accounts that need to be taken care of or looked after. I think it's the average everyday American who may have saved all their lives and then put their money in an account and have too little insurance to be comfortable. I think if we think about it from that perspective, Mr. Rice, that you did a really good job. There's no such thing as a small business. As a former small business owner, it was big business for me.
Thank you, sir.
And so it's that sentiment that helps me appreciate that you understand not only what you're talking about, but who we're talking for. And that, for me, is as important as what we're talking about. For senators who wish to submit questions for the record, those questions are due 1 week from today, Wednesday, September the 17th. To our witnesses, you will have 45 days from that day to submit your responses to questions for the record. Thank you very much for educating and informing not only those of us on the Banking Committee, but those who are paying attention to this on C-SPAN.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S. 2965 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to oppose S. 2965. This bill would impair Treasury's ability to support an important ally in South America, a region this administration has rightly prioritized. Argentina has the third largest economy in Latin America and has been a strong partner in supporting U.S. security and economic goals. Eliminating Treasury's ability to use the Exchange Stabilization Fund to support this important ally is unnecessary. I therefore oppose this bill and urge my Senate colleagues to do the same. I object.
Senator, objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, the reason that I ask for unanimous consent to proceed with the No Argentina Bailout Act, it's a bill that I co-authored with Senators Kaine, Van Hollen, Booker, Smith, Gallegos, Sanders, and Welch. And the reason for this is because in his presidential campaign, Donald Trump promised to put, quote, America first, not Argentina first, America first. Right now, American families are struggling to pay for groceries and rent because of Donald Trump's chaotic tariffs and other disastrous economic policies. President Trump and congressional Republicans shut down the government because they refused to work with Democrats to pass a bipartisan budget that would protect 15 million Americans' health care and prevent insurance premium hikes for tens of millions more. Now, Republicans would rather shut down the government than help Americans afford health care. Because of the Republican shutdown, more than 250,000 federal employees won't receive their scheduled paychecks. National parks are understaffed, and some are even closed entirely. Air traffic controllers and TSA agents aren't getting their paychecks, and shutdown-related staff shortages have led to flight delays. Critical government agency functions are being affected across the board. But one government function that President Trump didn't want to shut down, sending $20 billion, American taxpayer dollars, to Argentina. That's right. Even while the Trump administration is trying to fire more American workers and shut down more services here in the United States, Donald Trump is carefully keeping open the office at the Treasury Department responsible for executing his bailout of Argentina's financial markets. The administration agreed to send $20 billion in American taxpayer money to Argentina's central bank, and that loan is evidently just the start. Secretary Bessent also revealed that Treasury started purchasing Argentine pesos directly and promised that, going forward, Treasury would do whatever it takes to keep Argentina's financial markets afloat, including buying up the country's debt. Secretary Bessent seems to be saying that the American economy can tank and Americans can pay higher prices, but there will be no end to using American taxpayer dollars to bail out Argentina. For Trump, the leader of Argentina is more important than American families struggling with rising costs for health care. This is a bitter blow, but for American farmers, the story is even worse. For months now, American farmers, particularly American soybean farmers, have been suffering under the weight of Trump's sweeping tariffs. Buyers around the world have been reluctant to purchase from our farmers when Trump is slapping tariffs on their home countries. While our farmers suffer, Other countries sense an opportunity for themselves. A few weeks ago, Argentina cut a deal with China to boost the sales of their soybeans and leave American soybean farmers out in the cold. After Argentina took those actions, after Argentina cut a deal to take the legs out from underneath American farmers, Trump authorized a $20 billion bailout for Argentina. This development is so terrible for American farmers and so embarrassing that the Treasury Secretary was caught looking at frantic texts from President Trump's own Agriculture Secretary, complaining that the U.S. is bailing out a country that cozied up to China at the expense of American farmers. So why is Donald Trump backpedaling on America first to make it Argentina first? Because Donald Trump's personal friend, close political ally, and, quote, favorite president, Argentine President Javier Milei, is facing a critical midterm election in the coming weeks, and he is in trouble. Milei's popularity has plummeted in recent months because of his ongoing corruption scandals and the complete failure of his radical economic agenda. As a result, his party suffered a surprising defeat in local elections in September. Now, the election coming up on October 26th will determine whether Milei can keep exerting control over Argentina's legislature. With global investors pulling their money from the country, trying to get off his sinking ship and destabilizing its financial markets, his party's electoral chances looked really slim. So Trump is sending $20 billion U.S. taxpayer dollars to bail out Argentina and prop up Milei so he can stay in power. That's Argentina first, not America first. But there's more. The bailout for Argentina also helps Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's billionaire hedge fund buddies. Bessent's pals have bought up Argentina's debts, and if Argentina goes down, those Wall Street billionaires could lose a lot of money. Bailing out Argentina gives an off-ramp to the Wall Street giants who want to exit their investments. And meanwhile, here at home, the Trump administration is pushing 15 million Americans toward an unwanted off-ramp from their current health care. The No Argentina Bailout Act is really very simple. It would stop Donald Trump from using Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund to provide direct or indirect financial assistance to Argentina, including through the use of currency swap lines, currency or sovereign debt purchases, or direct loans. Any existing financial contracts or instruments that violate this prohibition would have to be sold or terminated within 7 days. The prohibition expires at the end of President Milei's term in December 2027. And if, for some unforeseen reason, it is actually in America's interest to provide economic aid to Argentina during this period, the administration can come here to Congress and get approval. Today, President Trump hosted the president of Argentina at the White House after showering his country with American taxpayer money. It is shameful that President Trump is propping up a foreign government while he shuts down the American government. It is simple. If you really want to put America first, then you will support American farmers and American families and urge passage of the No Argentina Bailout Act. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your opening statements. I'll start my questions with Mr. Hill. When did you receive a unanimous vote?
I believe that was December 2022.
3 years ago. What changed? What have you done so poorly in the last 3 years that you go from a unanimous vote to now a very polarized, partisan reality? The answer is nothing changed with you, but a lot has changed in Washington. Is it the Schumer shutdown? Is it the failure of the Biden administration? Is it the devastation that the employees of the FDIC have had to endure under leadership from the left? So many things have changed, and unfortunately, you will be the victim of some of those changes. I would like to, however, discuss the culture at the FDIC and what have you done to change the culture that you inherited from Mr. Grunberg?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question, Senator. And let me say at the outset that harassment of any kind is completely unacceptable. There is no tolerance for it at the FDIC or at any organization. Reforming the culture continues to be a top priority. There are a lot of things that we have been doing throughout the year 2025. I think the linchpin of our efforts is accountability. In my view, the largest root cause of the problems was years of lack of accountability. And when people were not held accountable for misconduct, not only did that mean that bad actors continued to misbehave and engage in misconduct, but people also lost faith and confidence in the system. So we have two new offices, the Office of Professional Conduct and the Office of Equal Employment Opportunity. Those two offices have been live. They have been conducting investigations, ensuring discipline is imposed. And I think that's the biggest piece of the cultural transformation efforts. There are a number of other things that we have been working on. We rolled out new anti-harassment training earlier this summer. We have new processes for intake of complaints, for reporting, for tracking. We also have made significant leadership changes across the agency. Obviously, there have been changes at the board level, but also the majority of our divisions and offices have new leaders from the past.
Thank you. What are you looking forward to accomplishing with joint rulemaking with the OCC on unsafe and unsound practices and MRAs? Maybe 30 seconds.
Sure. So the core goal there is to shift the focus of supervision so it is focused on core material financial risks rather than process. I think SVB is a great example of a case where the bank had all sorts of financial problems, but the supervisory criticisms were all focused on process. And so I think the fundamental goal there is to reorient supervision so it's focused on the fundamental financial risks that matter most.
Thank you. Mr. Cassidy, you said something that I thought was really encouraging, surprising, and frankly sad for today's homeowners. You became a homeowner at 20 years old, 3.5% down. That's pretty exciting. Wonderful, actually. My mother became a homeowner at 38 years old. And today, once again, 38 years old is the average first-time home buyer. The ranking member and I have worked a lot on the issue of home ownership. I'd love to hear from you how you're going to work with this committee, private sector, and the housing stakeholders nationwide to frankly expand access to affordable housing. About 30 to 45 seconds.
Senator Scott, thank you very much for that question. As you mentioned, I personally benefited from the FHA, was fortunate enough to enter home ownership at a relatively young age. But for many Americans, that is out of reach.
Yes.
Housing is too expensive. And I am focused at HUD's Office of Housing and the FHA, working with our partners, lenders, homeowners to streamline these programs, to make them more efficient, to make them less costly. Since I've started in April under the leadership of Secretary Turner, we've been taking inventory, not just of HUD's programs, but FHA's programs, to figure out how we can get more Americans into homes. Since President Trump took office, a record 800,000 FHA borrowers became homeowners, many first-time homeowners. FHA serves a $1.5 trillion single-family portfolio, and it's really taking inventory of each FHA program, working with lenders, working with partners, working with the boots on the ground to make these programs more efficient. And I look forward, Senator, to working with you and your staff and the rest of this committee on these initiatives.
I appreciate that, Mr. Hill. I'll have some questions for the record that you are aware of. I'm running out of time, so Mr. Hollis, I will unfortunately not be able to ask you the questions I had designed for you, but I will say to Vice President Hollis, congratulations on your success politically, and to your daughter never making a B. I'm sure she's going to graduate cum laude. I graduated thank you laude. And so I'll look forward to her success as well. He's Vice President Hollis. I wasn't talking to the dude at the counter. I was talking to the son who won the vice presidential race for student government. Far more important than anything else. Ranking member.